I feel like there's a thing of potential that we want to reach. A lot of people want to reach their potential, or they feel like I have this untapped potential, or we see potential in other people that don't tap into it fully. And it seems like Jesus was someone who was able to tap into his potential and beyond. But it seems like a lot of us never fully tap into that. It's like, like everyone dies with like so much potential still inside of us, even if they accomplish the greatest, scientific discoveries or art or athletics or music, there's still so much left within us. How should we view and think about our own potential? And how can we get the most out of our potential as human beings?
Well, that's a big question, right? And it sounds almost incredibly, I guess, discouraging that we all die with potential, but I actually think it's encouraging.
Okay.
See, because if you had limited potential, then you could die having used all your potential.
Okay.
But if you have unlimited potential, then you will die with some of that potential being never actualized.
Isn't that sad though, or is that a good thing?
No, it's a good thing, because you see, if you have a limited resource mentality, then you'll think to yourself, well, I only have so much potential. But if you have an abundance mentality and you realize, no, there's a limitlessness to human capacity. I'm going to die with some things I could have done undone. I have to live with that.
Oh, man.
And you're going to die with some of your potential never being actualized, because you have limitless potential. You have capacity that you're not even aware of. And the more you grow, the more you develop, the more you mature, the more you understand who you are as a human being, the more you'll access that potential. So really the question isn't, will you die with potential that you've never actualized? The question is, how much of that potential are you going to use during your life?
So how do we tap into the maximum amount that we could utilize and not regret the things that we're going to leave behind? Because there's going to be so much in us still. So how do we make sure we get the most out of us?
Right. And so I would say it's really a matter of focus. Don't focus on your potential, because that becomes incredibly self-centered. See, if you're just focusing on, I want to make sure I use all my potential, that I don't leave my potential unused, rather than asking, I want to make sure I do the most good in the world. I want to make sure that I've accomplished the most good for others. And so I think sometimes, even though we're talking about human development, it can become incredibly narcissistic. It's not really about how much potential you have. It really is about how much good you do.
Okay. And what if someone's feeling lost or trapped or hopeless, and they don't know where to go with their potential, and they're trying to figure out what their purpose is? How can they start to discover that? What are some ways they can at least start tapping into that?
Well, it's to me fascinating how you get different advice from different people. Some people say follow your passions, right? And that doesn't always work for me, because I'm passionate and
about everything.
And so people say do what you're passionate about. I'm going, then I'm going to do everything, because I think some people actually are just passionate. Then they pick an object, and they're passionate, and they pick a career, but they could be passionate about 10 different things. And then some people say, well, do what you're good at, or what you're talented to do. But there's some people who are really talented at multiple things. Or people feel like, well, I'm not talented at anything. It has the same effect. If you're a 10 out of 10 in 10 things, you're still confused.
Right.
Just like if you're a 1 out of 10 on 10 things. And so it's not even about how much talent you have. It is an intersection of passion, because passion gives you energy and it fuels you. It has to be something you love. But I also think it's an intersection also of natural talent and ability, and the things that you seem to be predisposed to be good at. I do think there's a genetic element to this, that there's just some things I'm not born to do. You know, that adage that, if you can dream it, you can do it. It's just not true.
Right.
Maybe if you can dream it, someone can do it. But there are so many things I can dream that I can't do. There's some things I can dream that you can actually do.
Right.
And I think sometimes we have to realize is that it's a combination of things. It's a combination of how you're designed, what you're actually good at doing, and what you're passionate, what you love to do. My brother was really good at playing football, but he didn't love it. And so he had a lower ceiling. And other people, I think, were more passionate about a sport and had a lower ceiling that accomplished more. And then it's also, I think, what's behind the curtain. What do you love to grow in? What do you love to learn? What do you love to develop? When people say to me, oh, I really want to become a pro athlete, or I want to become an actor, but then I would ask them questions like, okay, how many hours a day are you in the gym? Or are you paying for acting lessons in LA? And I can't tell you how many young actors tell me, I can't afford acting lessons.
Right.
And I say, oh, then you can't afford to become an actor. And my daughter is really a world-class singer.
Yes.
And what would drive her crazy is that she would talk to lesser talented singers who worked with her, and she would say, you need to get voice lessons. And they would take it as an insult. Mariah's been taking voice lessons as long as she could virtually breathe. She never saw her level of talent as the reason to not develop discipline.
That's interesting.
And I think a lot of times what happens is that we want the outcome, but not the process.
Yeah.
We love the idea of the outcome, but we don't love the reality of the process. You can usually identify the dream that you're, in a sense, created to live out because you actually love the struggle, not just the success.
Right.
And when you fall in love with the struggle of something, and as a writer, I mean, I love the outcome.
Yeah.
And,
you love the finished book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what people don't realize is that I actually love the outcome less than I love the process.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I love the process. I love the struggle of trying to understand a concept or to have clarity about a particular theme or idea. I love the struggle of going into my inner world and figuring out how this connects to who I really am and how to bring information and experience together. And I love the struggle of, can this actually be something worth publishing?
Yes.
And if I didn't love that struggle, I would not feel really that connected to the outcome. And that's why
it's appreciating the journey. It's appreciating and enjoying the experience of the pain.
Right. And that's why there's a difference. Some people are authors, but they're not writers.
Yeah.
They wanted to get a book published, and maybe they're great at branding and marketing, and the book sells great, which is wonderful. But being a writer is different. Being a writer is this deep need to struggle through an idea, an experience, and to translate that into this art form of a book. And I think it's true for everything in life. It's like being a cook or a chef, right? And I'm not a great chef, but I love cooking, but I've learned to love the process of it. I love, like, I have a smoke. My backyard looks like I'm a wannabe chef, right? You know, I have a smoker, and I have a hibachi grill, and I have a regular barbecue grill, and because I love Japanese cooking, and I love good Southern smoking, and I love learning the process. And I've made brisket so bad that I literally threw it out. I wouldn't even feed it to my dog. It came out so hard, and I could have given up, but I just wanted to keep going back. And I realized that if I'm going to ever have an outcome I'm proud of, I have to be committed to the process. I have to be willing to fail. I have to be willing to struggle. And I think that's a part of it, is when you find something you love so much that the struggle gives you a sense of significance, that's when you're on the right path.
Yes. My friend Jay Shetty says, you can't be anything you want. He's like, people tell us you can be anything you want. He says, you can't be anything you want, but you can be everything you are. And I think that's the line, but it's something around that.
I love him. He's so insightful.
Yeah, you can't be anything you want, but you can be everything you actually are.
That's right. And I've seen certain cliches or adages that are out there, like in Nike, it says, if you have a body, you're an athlete. And when I look at that, I go, yes and no. Okay. And if you have a body, you have the potential of being athletic.
Yes.
But we translate that to say, if you have a body, you're an Olympian.
Right.
But not everyone can be an Olympian.
No.
And not everyone can be, in the true sense, an athlete. But everyone can move toward physical health. And so when I look at things like that, I go, those statements can actually be incredibly misleading. I have a body, my body's deteriorating. I'm 63 now. I don't have the same body I had at 23 or even at 33. But I can still be athletic. I can still compete. I can still have fun and enjoy myself. But I need to realize that I have a body, but it doesn't make me an Olympian.
Right.
And maybe it barely makes me an athlete. I was in Florida at a hotel working out, and I saw this sign that said, if it's humanly possible, I can do it. And I read that and I thought, I wish that was true. But it's not true again. If it's humanly possible, there is a human that can do it.
Not you, though.
But not necessarily me. And so I would say it's the same thing with genius. That when I write about genius, I was just in a conversation with the guy who the TV show Scorpion was inspired by. Walter has the highest recorded IQ in the world.
Yes.
And we started having a conversation about genius, and he completely disagrees with me, which I thought was wonderful. The guy with the highest IQ in the world completely disagrees with me. And because we started talking about how do you define genius? And he goes, well, the facts are against you because only 1% to 2% of the world population ever graph out as a genius. And so the facts are against me. 98% of people express no visible genius at all. So when I write about not just the genius of Jesus, but the capacity of human beings to carry a unique genius in every single person, I understand the facts are against me, but the future is for me.
Ooh, okay.
Because the facts are always for the past. The facts are rarely for the future. See, the facts were not for air travel. The facts were not submarines. The facts were not for airplanes. The facts were not for cell phones.
Breaking the 4-minute mile.
Yeah. The facts are never for the future. The facts are always for the past.
Interesting.
And so here I'm having a conversation with the guy with the highest IQ in the world, and I'm realizing he's right. The facts are against me. And he's in a rare category of that 2% of geniuses in the world. But it doesn't mean that human beings do not carry within them an inherent genius, which is a very different thing. Because in the same way that not everyone's going to be an Olympian, everyone can actually increase their capacity, their physical capacity. In the same way that not everyone is going to be Einstein or Bobby Fischer or Picasso or Mozart, it doesn't mean that there isn't a unique capacity within every human being. And that's what I'm really writing about. 20 years ago, when I first started writing, I made an anthropological statement that every human being is an artist, every human being is a creative. Back then, it was seen as absurd. And yet, when you stop and think about this, because I've been a part of TED for like 20 years, and I listened to the TED Talks, and I've been a part of that community, and there's always someone who's an expert on a species, and they highlight why that species has so much value. And one of the questions I kept asking myself is, well, who's up there advocating for the human species? And what makes humans unique? What makes us different than every other species? And one of the things that really struck me was the one thing that human beings can do that no other species can do is that human beings can materialize the invisible. That human beings can actually take the imagination and translate into reality. There is no other species that can do that. Now, other species may be able to imagine, but they can't translate that imagination into reality. And so here's what I think is fascinating. If you looked at species from a purely objective level, from a naturalistic perspective, what human beings can do is, what bees create honey, right? Silkworms create silk. Like ants create colonies, beavers create dams. Humans create futures. We're the only species that can create future. If the planet was left to every other species, the planet would stay in its present. It would never change. And it would evolve in a natural way, but humans have an ability to imagine a future that does not exist and create it.
Right.
We have this table, we have this book,
right.
we have this beautiful studio. It was all in someone's imagination first. And so before there were all these bulbs, before there was the School of Greatness, it was inside of your imagination. And so when I walked into the studio, what I realized I was doing, I wasn't just walking inside of a room. I was walking inside of the imagination of Lou's house.
Right. From years ago.
That's right.
Yeah.
I stepped into your imagination here. You've invited me into your imagination, and now it's a part of my reality. All of us are living inside of someone else's imagination right now.
That's interesting.
This nation exists because it was in the imagination of Jefferson and Washington and Franklin and Hamilton. And with all of its imperfections, we're living inside of the imagination of these people. MLK Jr. said, I have a dream that one day a man will be measured by the content of his character and not the color of his skin. When Barack Obama took the oath of office and became the president of the United States, he was literally walking inside of the dream of a man who no longer lived because he had been killed, but his dream could not be killed.
Wow.
And we were now living in the imagination of MLK Jr. We were living inside of the imagination of others who fought for a better world. And so when I look at the human species and I go, what humans can do is we create futures, then I go, okay, that is an intrinsic genius, whether we recognize it or not.
So we all have genius within us.
I'm absolutely convinced of that. Now, it doesn't mean we all actualize that genius. And it also doesn't mean that we all have genius at the level of an Olympian.
Right.
And so we have to recognize that there are individuals who are in unexpected iteration of human capacity. Mozart changes the game for composition. Einstein changes the game in the world of physics. Bobby Fischer changes the game in the world of chess. Tiger Woods changes the game in the world of golf. Michael Jordan changes the game in the world of basketball. You have individuals who change the game. Picasso changes the game.
Why are some people more genius level than others then? Why are they the anointed or chosen ones, or did they choose themselves?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. There's a man named George Land who worked for NASA, and he was asked, I think around 1968, to develop an assessment so they could find geniuses to work for NASA.
Interesting.
And so George Land developed what was a genius assessment. And they gave that assessment to 5-year-olds. 98% of 5-year-olds were identified as geniuses. They did a longitudinal study, followed these kids for the next 10 years. When they were 10 years old, only 30% of them still tested as geniuses. By the time they were 15 years old, only 12% of them were identified as geniuses. I think it was 128,000 people then were graphed, and average age 31, only 2% could be identified as geniuses. So the question doesn't seem to be, is there genius inside of everyone? The question really needs to be, what happened to the genius that was inside of everyone?
What happened?
98% of us are born geniuses, 2% of us live out that genius.
Interesting.
I think it's the same with human creativity. It's the same with human imagination. A part of the mistake of adulthood is that we see maturity as equivalent to standardization. If I can make you the same as everyone else, you're now an adult. If I can teach you to be standardized and to conform, you are now an adult.
Right.
And I think neuroscience tells us that by the age of 12, our brain has decided who we are. So whatever you focus on before the age of 12, that becomes your mental capacity.
It's harder to break out of that later.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult. How many languages do you speak?
Almost one.
I know you're trying to learn a little Spanish.
Almost English, yeah. I'm learning Spanish, yes.
And for you, Spanish is a love language.
I love listening to salsa music and Latin music, but I don't always fully understand it. But I feel it, but I don't comprehend it.
So if I asked you if you were a linguistic savant, you would probably say
no.
No. In fact, you'd probably say you're bad at languages.
Yes. At this point, yes.
How old do you think you were when you learned English?
1, 2. You're starting to pick it up, I guess, right away.
Right. So you're 1, 2 years old.
Yeah.
And you're learning one of the most difficult, complex languages in the world. When you were 2 years old, Louis, you were a linguistic savant.
Right. That's true.
If they'd moved you to Tokyo, you'd have learned Japanese without any difficulty.
That's true.
If they'd moved you to Manila, you would have learned Tagalog. And if they'd moved you to England, you would have finally learned real English.
Exactly, yes.
And if you'd gone to Buenos Aires, you would have learned Spanish. And the crazy thing about it is at the age of 2, you had all the attributes of genius, of a linguistic genius.
Wow.
And if you'd had the benefit of moving to 4 or 5 places from the age of 1 to 10, you might have learned 2, 3, 4 different languages.
Right.
The reason Americans only speak one language is because their brain knew they only needed one language to survive and to thrive.
Right.
Your brain will only learn and hold the capacity for what it needs to survive.
Wow.
And so Spanish was my first language. I came to the States when I was young. I learned English right away. I remember early on my report card said transitional period, learning English. But the truth was, I could read that. I just didn't tell them because I knew I wouldn't get grades and, for a while. And it was, and I say this without any sense of accomplishment. It was easy. Learning English was easy. And you know why? Because when I was 3, 4, I was a linguistic savant. And now that I'm 63, a lot of that's diminished. And so I still try to study languages and learn languages. And I've studied German and Hebrew and Greek and, of course, English and Spanish. And I've spent some time studying Mandarin and Korean and Portuguese. And I just try to keep my brain pliable and adaptable. But I don't have the same capacity now that I did then, because I didn't nurture that capacity. I wonder how many different aspects of human genius were simply left unnurtured. And so we lost them along the way.
Yeah.
And
so how do we recultivate them at later stages in life?
Well, I would step back and go, what's the most important aspect of genius to recultivate? Because the likelihood that I'm going to be Mozart is not going to be really high, or to be Picasso, or to be Bobby Fischer. And here's the crazy thing about genius. It's really irritating because it's not transferable. I could spend my life at Mozart and I would never become a world-class composer.
You can get better, but then you're not going to be world-class.
If anything, I might just become bitter.
Or more frustrated, exactly.
Because, you see, what genius does is it makes greatness look ordinary.
Yeah.
And
effortless.
And so that's why a lot of people, when they become an expression of genius, they're actually despised by their peers. And I could spend my life with Picasso and never paint like Picasso.
Right.
Or, I could spend my life with Bobby Fischer and never learn how to become a master in chess. But the genius of Jesus, which is why I wrote about it, is the singular genius that's transferable.
What is that?
It's how to be fully human. And as I was studying genius for the last 40 years, I was always struck that there wasn't a single list that had Jesus on it, of geniuses. And that list would be, the greatest, probably the most renowned genius in history is probably Leonardo da Vinci. And he's sort of like the iconic genius. In fact, a lot of my life was shaped around the aspiration of Leonardo. And I would study Da Vinci, I would study his thinking, I would study some of his practices, and I tried to emulate them and take them on in my life, which is why I worked at becoming ambidextrous. It's why I would do so many things right-handed, and as opposed to left-handed, or left-handed, so it was right-handed. Tried to use both sides of my brain, and tried to develop practices of Da Vinci, just trying to become more creative and more adaptive, more pliable mentally. But if I spent my life with Da Vinci, I'm not going to become Da Vinci. And so what you realize is that genius is not transferable. But there's one exception. It's the genius of Jesus.